How can I deny what's right in front of me? Someone who never grows old, never gets hurt. Oh my God, your hand. Someone who changes in ways that can't be explained. Hey, are you okay? Your eye. Girls bitten.
Oh my God, what happened to you?
It's nothing. Bodies drained of blood.
Did she say what kind of animal it was?
She said it was a vampire.
I don't know how many people have actually read the Vampire Diaries saga since 1991. I assume quite a few, but it is the most loyal and passionate group of people, as far as I can tell, that I've ever come across.
I'm definitely a fan of the show. I sort of went into the show knowing that I was gonna like it because I'm a fan of the horror genre and I'm a fan of the teen high school drama. But I didn't expect to like it as much as I do.
I hear a lot of people who question the sort of vampire craze and sort of reluctantly watch the show, not knowing what it was about, not sure, you know, and are pulled into it because it works on all levels.
When the show premiered and we had the highest premiere in CW's network history, I think that was the first indicator of, oh, okay, wow.
It beat out franchise shows like 90210 that had like years of hype behind them. It beat out shows like Gossip Girl that, you know, had this huge following before the show even launched. And so it was kind of a surprise hit.
Nina lived with me for a while in Los Angeles. So before we knew that the show was getting picked up and we didn't really have any answers, there was this one website, vampirediaries.net, that we would check constantly and consistently because they'd always have new information.
When the show was announced, myself and Red, who was also a huge fan of the Vampire Diaries book series, decided that we should start a site and let people know that this book fandom exists and that we're excited to watch the development of this TV show and follow it, see what happens, whether the show happens or not, but at least get the name of the series out there and kind of put the highlight on the books.
One of the reasons the show is successful is because of her and Red and V, both of them together. I mean, they actually helped make the show.
It has kind of become the go-to site for all the fans, both of the books and then people who tuned into the show and have become fans of the show, where they get to kind of debate it out and hash it out amongst themselves. And their point of view has been really productive.
We're not just seeing the books and can expect every single step of the way what's going to happen. This is an entirely new story that's being told, and they want to know the answers and they want to know where it's going.
People expected critics to hate the Vampire Diaries. People expected it to be another Twilight where they've got fans, but the critics are tearing it to shreds every day. But that hasn't been the case with Vampire Diaries. Critics have really taken it for what it is and given it a lot of props.
There's something special about the Vampire Diaries. To my mind, it has done the best job of putting the vampire in high school. It's got a great ensemble cast. It's very well scripted, and it isn't afraid to be scary.
Anyone, anytime, anyplace.
Vampires draw their energy from blood, which is probably the most powerful human symbol of them all, because it can stand for just about anything. It stands for the emotions, the passions, the life force itself, sexuality, and the sight of blood, of course, represents death. All through its history, the vampire has been one thing, an outsider. And the outsider, of course, can be a repellent monster. It can also be a romantic anti-hero.
You can sort of take him and put him in different situations and different circumstances, and they're always sexy. It's just, there's so many possibilities for great vampire stories.
I love it. Everything vampire, from fashion to TV to film.
Even before Bram Stoker, there was a whole vampire culture. He made up different rules when he wrote Dracula in 1897, and a lot of people use that as a kind of prototype, but yet so much has changed.
We think of Dracula, especially if we haven't read the book, as a archetypal, sophisticated, suave, seductive aristocrat. Bram Stoker wouldn't recognize that figure at all. His Dracula was a hideous old man who became younger as he drank blood, but he never became attractive, and he certainly never seduced anybody.
I mean, his vampire had a pointed head, pointed ears, hair on his palms, fangs protruding over his lower lips.
In European folklore, the vampire was pretty much indistinguishable from what we would think of today in movie terms as a zombie. You know, a ravenous living corpse who rose from its grave to take energy from the living. The big turning point in the evolution of dramatic vampires was when Dracula was adapted to the stage. And this is where we got the evening clothes and the opera cape and the suave Transylvanian charm and all the things that every school kid today will tell you Dracula requires. Stoker would be flabbergasted.
They're modernized now. They're young and they're hip and they're sexier and they're better looking and they're not so foreboding.
I think the seeds of sexuality were always there in the vampire, but it was a long time before they became out-and-out romantic figures in literature and popular culture.
They are incredibly versatile creatures. If you go back to the classic monsters of the Universal cycle back in the 1930s, and you think of the Frankenstein monster, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Wolfman, the Phantom of the Opera, out of all those monsters, the vampires have made the greatest transformation. These creatures have been able to cross every single genre. Vampires have appeared in sci-fi, action, they've been superheroes, anime, westerns. There was a vampire ballet by the Royal Winnipeg Ballet Company called Dracula, Pages from a Virgin's Diary. You can't imagine zombies doing that.
Looking back at all the B horror stuff, you know, and those creatures all sort of got left in the in the dust, and the vampires evolved into this, you know, total sex symbol.
It's the vampires that usually do work. Werewolves, it's tough. It's tough to make werewolves work. It's tough to make any other creature work. And to live in a human world, there is a nice sort of foundation of what vampire lore is supposed to be.
You hate him and you love him, and I always say the greatest villains are people you can sympathize with.
Get it in the car, quickly.
And you can almost see why they are the way they are, even though they do terrible, terrible things.
I'm at the Sizzler. I had the buffet.
They're able to have everything they want, yet have nothing at the same time because they feel nothing for what they have.
They are able to do things that people dream and think and imagine, but aren't actually possible.
Whoa, how did you do that?
What vampires represent are power and sex and mystique.
They appeal to this mystery that every young girl wants to. And a lot of young men, kind of, when you're a teenager, you like going to that forbidden place.
They're incredibly knowledgeable. They can be very violent and dark and bad boy.
Ow!
They're alluring and sexy and mysterious and unattainable.
Taking that costume a little too far?
I think there are two characteristics, essential characteristics that you really can't take away from vampires. And one is their immortality.
It's cool not growing old. I like being the eternal stud.
Yes, being a 150-year-old teenager has been the height of my happiness.
You take that away, you don't have the undead. You have something totally different. The other thing is they survive on blood.
I prefer mine at 98.6.
In most vampire stories, there's always a girl.
Girls are looking for a kind of boyfriend hero who will adopt some of those mannerisms and culture that maybe our society has lost. So when you have someone like Stefan, he protects Elena, he's very much of a gentleman, and I think there might be a yearning in our society for the teenage and 20-something population to kind of bring a little bit of that back. They would like to see that in our relationships.
Don't hide from me.
You have the immortal pursuing the mortal, and there's something that's so unattainable, and I think that's what's really alluring about vampires, especially, you know, for women.
You know, from the audience perspective, you kind of sympathize with that longing and that wanting of someone you can't have.
In fact, Stefan and I have watched almost every single person we've ever cared about die.
We don't need to get into that right now, Damon.
Poor Elena, I mean, not only you know, navigating through your teenage years, and especially after her parents have just passed away, but then to meet someone who could just be the love of her life, and then to find out that he's not actually living, I mean, that could be a bit of a shock.
Part of me wishes that I could forget too. Forget meeting you, finding out what you are and everything that's happened since.
The story of love between the mysterious loner, bad boy outsider with the piercing gaze and the woman, you know, the girl that's just looking for the right piece of her life that's missing, and bringing those two together and then adding the vampire element on top of that. It's just like, it's perfect storytelling.
One thing that they do differently that we haven't seen, at least in a very long time, is the female characters in the Vampire Diaries aren't victims. They're not passive. Their lives aren't just happening to them, and they're not submissive. They're powerful and active, and they're participants in their own fate. They're making decisions for themselves. They're asking questions. My experience with the fan base of the show has been incredible. I post an article, and within minutes, I have comments, I have tweets, I get emails all the time from fans talking about, really passionately about the show and really getting into it and talking about the characters and their motivations. The fans of the show talk like writers.
And they have these conversations with each other, and they want to know, and it's kind of a vibrant, living, breathing thing, which it hasn't really been. Because now you have social networking, now you have the internet and this massive platform for fans to express their excitement and to their love of the show and the books and to interact with each other. There's a lot more easier avenues for communication.
I think people will say to you that one of the worst things that you can do when you're writing television is to read the internet, and yet you just can't help yourself.
I signed up for Twitter, and so you sort of hear it firsthand, and you hear everything that's wrong and everything that's right, and that's the beauty of having sort of that one-on-one with your, you know, your very sort of loyal fans, or the ones that are most outspoken.
It's pretty crazy how it all works and how much access the fans have to people on TV shows because of Twitter and Facebook and all these things.
I have a Twitter, and that's a big tool to reach fans, because you can see when they want to reply to you, and if you want to send something out to them, I mean, it goes out to all your followers instantly.
I talk to them on Twitter. I've gotten a few more followers, so it's hard for me to see when they like message me on that.
I personally have hard enough time checking my voicemails. But I send my love through Nina and Katerina's Twitter page.
You know, you're taking photos with your co-stars and watching this go on Twitter, and then 2 days later you'll see it in a publication or something. I mean, the expedient manner in which information travels now, how quickly it is really fascinating to me. It's really cool.
I enjoy that part because you feel connected to the fans. You feel like you're a part of that community. And that's probably something that other filmmakers and creators of shows didn't experience before.
There's almost nobody who's a casual viewer of this show. They're not just watching the show, they're watching the show, then getting online, they're talking to their friends, they're going to Hot Topic mall signings in the thousands, like screaming and, you know, looks like a fire hazard.
2,500 people screaming every time Ian would go to open his mouth, but he wouldn't be able to finish a sentence because they were screaming so loud he couldn't hear his words.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
The screams, shrieks. I couldn't believe it.
They were screaming and crying, and I mean, my heart just like exploded. It was the most amazing thing ever.
To actually like meet fans, the meet and greet, that was just so amazing.
In real life, who would you pick, Damon or Stefan?
She actually has a great answer to this. So.
If I had to pick between Damon and Stefan, I would honestly go for their other brother, Defin.
Or season 3.
You're so unaware, you know, you're going to work every day, you're oblivious, and then you're like, wow, people really do watch this thing.
There was one girl who her mom was carrying her, and she was hiding behind her hair because when she saw Ian and Paul, she thought they were actual vampires, and she was terrified of them. which in contrast to the other girls who were between 12 and 30 who asked Ian and Paul to bite them and kiss them. And it was just, I don't know what it is, but they love their vampires. They really want a real life Salvatore.
Nina, Paul, and Ian went to Comic-Con, but it was before the show was released. It was just to premiere the pilot. So hearing their stories from that, in which everything was still beginning, and then cut to our Hot Topic appearance when we're in this mall in Georgia with 2,500 screaming girls that are about to cry at anything that Ian Somerhalder says. It definitely, it was a very surreal moment for all of us.
We got here at 7:45 this morning. We've been waiting for 7 hours. Yeah, I just thought they were all amazing. I drove 5 hours to get this poster. We're still in shock, obviously.
I think Julie Plec was honestly astonished that they won the People's Choice Award for Favorite New TV Drama because they don't have nearly as many viewers as all of the other shows that were nominated in that category.
The People's Choice Awards are different from any other award show because they're not decided upon by experts or judges or an academy. They're voted on by the general public online. They won the Best New TV Drama for 2010. The fact that the Vampire Diaries won that shows not only the size of the fan base, but the passion of the fan base, because people were going on and voting as many times as they could. They were starting sort of grassroots campaigns on Twitter and fan sites and Facebook.
I don't think anybody, when we started this out, were expecting a People's Choice Award. I think we were hoping for a back nine before anything, and now it's just kind of exploded into something that I don't think any of us really anticipated.
For me, that was like, oh, wow, because the people voted. They voted the Vampire Diaries, so that was really cool. We're very grateful.
The fans feel like they know them on some level as far as these personalities that have always been really positive and supportive and playful with them in this online forum, that there's a lot of affection for the personalities behind the show as much as there is for the show itself.
Vampires are and hopefully will be for a long time the craze and the phenomenon, and as popular as they are now. It's kind of cool to be part of the craze and be part of the phenomenon that is vampires.
Such a fulfillment to my 12-year-old self to be a part of one of these television shows. So I will be the first one to admit that I geek out about it.
20 years from now, when I'm still acting, I'm always gonna have a point of pride to look back and say that I was part of like the emergence of the vampire genre in the 2000s. I'll always be proud to say that. You know, it's huge. I think it's a revolution in its own, but like, it'll probably die out again, and then in maybe 20, 25 years, it'll pick back up again, or 10 years or less than that. And I can always just say, yeah, I was on one of those vampire shows.